Tonight, a collection of Disney's live-action remakes, and how the more Disney made, the less enjoyable these films became.
Hello everyone, I am back once again. This time though, I'm here for less of a rant and more of a chronological countdown of a certain group of movies created by Disney. That's right, the Disney Live Action Remakes. Now, these films have been around for longer than most of you may believe. While they became a mainstream source of media from Disney in the 2010s, they started out as only an occasional thing much earlier before the 2000s even began. But it's in 2017 when they started to get their less than ideal reputation, and it only went downhill from there. With that said, this won't be a full-on rant, and no, it won't be a deep dive into all these films either. It will be a simple discussion where I focus on specific things that I either enjoyed or despised about these films. With that said, it's time to discuss the rise and fall of the Disney live-action remakes. Oh, and also, only films that are closely based on the original films count. So if there is no animated counterpart from the film, then it doesn't count. These films are the ones I'm referring to. With that said, let's talk about some remakes. Now, the first remake was Jungle Book 1994. And this one isn't necessarily bad, just boring, since all of the animal characters have absolutely no personality and are really just regular animals. There really isn't much noteworthy about this film, aside from the fact that several characters do die in some pretty disturbing ways, including one guy getting mauled by Shere Khan, albeit the actual carnage is off-screen. Overall, this film isn't terrible, but if you want faithfulness to the original film, this one isn't for you. Now, the remake to the 101 Dalmatians is actually a good one. While the dogs being mute is a negative, the rest of the film makes up for it. The comedy is actually pretty funny for the most part, especially when it comes to Horace and Jasper, who are great comic relief henchmen like in the original film. While the banger song Cruella DeVille doesn't show up until the end credits due to Roger's career being changed from a musician to a video game developer, I personally like this change because 1, I'm a gamer, and 2, it was a fun way to insert 2D animation into the film. However, the best part of this film was Cruella herself, played masterfully by Glenn Close. Her outfits alone are actually pretty cool, and fun fact, Glenn Close actually got to keep them all after the film was done. As for Cruella herself, her manic behavior was even more obvious here than in the original, making her character all the more unhinged and entertaining at the same time. Oh, and this laugh gives me the chills. Overall, a great film, and I actually recommend it. Maleficent is a mixed bag. On the one hand, the film looks great and the casting is good. Plus, the banter with the three fairies is decent, and Angelina Jolie is good in the role of Maleficent herself. But I do have some problems. For starters, this film ruins the original point of Maleficent's character. That being that she was made to be a card-carrying and evil character whom you can't help but like in spite of how evil she is. The sympathetic backstory and redemption kind of ruins the point of the character, and because of that, it ultimately hinders the film. King Stefan was also butchered in this film, being turned into a well-meaning yet somewhat bumbling king, into a scumbag with very little redeeming qualities. Do I hate this film? No. But I do think it would have been far better if it wasn't made the way it was and it was instead just a regular Sleeping Beauty remake. This one actually rivals the original in my opinion. For starters, while the mice having a far less important role is a downside, it's ultimately minor since we get to focus more on the other characters. Cinderella herself is pretty likable, and the fact that she meets the prince before the ball makes their relationship a lot more believable. since it isn't just love at first sight. They actually have a chance to talk and bond, so because of that, the romance is honestly better in this version. The intro to the film is also a lot more detailed rather than it just being glossed over in a storybook segment. But perhaps the best part of this film is the movie's villain. Lady Tremaine is better here than she was in the original. Her cruelty is enhanced in this version, but at the same time she gets an actual reason to hate Cinderella. And despite her cruelty, she actually has a few moments where you almost feel bad for her. And unlike Maleficent, she isn't given a redemption since she's still very much the villain of the story. And how could I not mention Cate Blanchett in the role? She's just incredible. Overall, great remake, and I actually recommend for you guys to check it out. Now this is how you make a Jungle Book remake. This is honestly better than the original in my opinion. While it has a darker tone, I can accept that since it's still a great film, and the comedy isn't completely gone. While some people do complain about Ka's gender change, I actually like it since it makes her more deceptive, since her calm and soothing voice actually makes it more believable that you would fall for her deception. Although honestly, I like all the characters in this film. Even Mowgli is more likable here than he was in the original. However, once again, the villain is the best part. Shere Khan is not only played masterfully by Idris Elba, but since he appears more, he's more than just a plot device that only appears in the last bit of the film. Plus, this tiger is legitimately scary, despite the fact that he only has one functional eye. Overall, my personal favorite of the remakes, which unfortunately means the quality goes down from here. Alright, this one I'm split on. On the one hand, I like some of the performances in this film, such as with Gaston, LeFou, Maurice, the Beast, Lumiere, and Cogsworth. And they did address one of the plot holes in the original to an extent, which, that's good. On the other hand, while I heavily respect Emma Watson as an actress, her auto-tuned voice in the singing segments is not that good. And some of the other female actresses don't put their best foot forward either. Overall, this film is watchable, but I find the original to be a better experience. That being said, compared to some of the other remakes up ahead, it's freaking Oscar-worthy. This segment will be focusing on two remakes at once, Dumbo and Lady and the Tramp. The reason why I'm talking about both of them right now in this short segment is, frankly, I don't care. I found these films to be incredibly forgettable and boring. Not outright insulting like some of the upcoming remakes, but overall, I found them both to be a bore to go through, and I'd rather not watch them if I had a choice. Now we're getting to the remakes that are subpar at best. For starters, with the Aladdin remake. I find Will Smith's genie to be pretty uncanny at times. Also, Will Smith doesn't have nearly enough energy for the character. I get that nobody can replace Robin Williams, but that doesn't mean they couldn't try to either get Will to try a little bit harder, or pick someone who is more willing to push his performance. Most of the other characters are bland and boring, and as such, I cannot get myself invested in them. But contrary to some of the previous remakes, the villain is the worst part of the film. I hate what they did with Jafar in this film. Not only did they remove everything that made Jafar an iconic and memorable villain, but Marwan Kenzari's performance just plain sucks in my opinion. No disrespect to him, but I just don't like his performance in this role. Overall, this film is subpar, but compared to some of the others, it's watchable. Ironic, isn't it? One of the best Disney movies ends up being one of their worst remakes. This is pretty much the original, minus the heart and soul. Despite James Earl Jones returning for the remake, his performance is lesser here, due to lacking a lot of the emotion. Not to mention, the tough defer from Simba's main journey into Rafiki ends up getting halted by several obstacles, which I'm gonna say it, was not needed and was just filler to pad out the runtime. But the part that upsets me the most is Scar.
Look how they massacred my boy.
Oh boy, where do I begin? For starters, while I do like the actor who plays Scar, he was not right for the role. He lacks the charm that Jeremy Irons brought to the role, and as such, he comes off as far more bland and boring. Oh, and the worst part about him, his song, Be Prepared, which is an absolute banger in the original, was cut in half, and the actor wasn't even properly singing until the last little bit. Overall, I do not like this film. The next film is even worse. Now we are at what is, in my opinion, the worst remake of them all. This one takes everything meaningful from the original and throws it in the garbage. Unlike the other bad remakes thus far, and even after it, which all of them have at least something positive, the Mulan remake has pretty much nothing going for it. For starters, the cinematography is so badly made that it makes it feel like it was just a bunch of clips jumbled together with no sense of consistency. Next, the hypocrisy of Disney to remove Mushu to make the film more realistic, yet adding a shape-shifting sorceress and a phoenix, which, by the way, are birds well known for burning themselves alive and then resurrecting themselves from those ashes. Tell me, what's more realistic? A person being able to shapeshift, along with a bird that is capable of self-resurrection, or a small flightless dragon that only breathes small bursts of fire? Oh, and they replaced Shan Yu and the Huns with Porygon and another lesser-known group of barbarians for the sake of the realism I mentioned earlier. And long story short, these guys are nowhere near as menacing as the Huns in the original. Oh, and now let's get to the worst part of the film, which is the title character. Mulan, for the lack of better words, is a Mary Sue, plain and simple. In the original, she actually had to struggle and work hard to get where she did. And she did it all on her own, no powers and no help. Which makes her more relatable, especially for those who end up in a situation similar to Mulan's. Albeit that part's not as common, given the whole situation. But overall, the original Mulan was a very likable and relatable character. In the remake, she gets mysterious powers which allow her to plow through all her challenges with no effort on her part. On top of that, she's also an incredibly boring character to follow, because of the fact that she never gets actually challenged in a meaningful way. And because of that, she's difficult to relate to. I would go over the other characters, but they're one note and boring, so I'm not going to discuss them. Overall, I do not recommend this one in the slightest. But if you do like it, okay, that's fine. I respect your opinion. The Mulan remake may be the worst one in my opinion, but this one probably has the worst reputation. I'll give the remake this. Pinocchio himself isn't a bad character, and he actually looks exactly like he does in the original, aside from the fact that he's in a live-action style. Next, the actor for Gaston, Luke Evans, is back as another Disney villain, this time the Coachman. And this version of the Coachman is more charismatic and charming than he was in the original, while still retaining his dark and evil personality. So, what are the problems? Well, I could go over some changes that made the right-wingers mad, but I won't, because I don't like getting into politics. Instead, let's discuss the final challenge. In the original, Monstro was just an angry and hungry whale, which ironically made him scarier since he didn't need to be an exaggerated monstrosity to be a menace. In the remake, he looks like an eldritch horror leviathan monster from the depths of the sea, which was completely unnecessary. I don't know why Disney decided to go with this change. I was also not fond of the climactic chase, especially with how Pinocchio essentially turned himself into a motor engine to get away from Monstro. And the film itself was rather boring a lot of the time. There were some fun scenes here and there, but they get overlapped by a lot of the boring aspects. Overall, my thoughts on this remake is that It's a little overhated, but it's not exactly a good film either. Oh boy, Peter Pan and Wendy. I actually didn't bother watching this one much. But what I have seen and heard, this film has a less than stellar reputation. Mainly due to a couple little problems. For starters, Wendy. Oh boy, is she unlikable. For starters, she's a prime example of character assassination. In the original, she was kind, caring, imaginative, and overall friendly. In the remake, she's a rude, selfish, obnoxious jerk who's even shown to be violent at times. She also, at the same time, is depicted as perfect and never needs to learn to develop and become a better person, and because of that, she never learns from her jerkish behavior. Overall, despite being the title character, she's the worst part of the film. But what about the other aspects? Well, Peter Pan is even more morally questionable than he is in the original. And one of the appeals of Peter Pan is despite him being a playful kid, he's also somewhat in the gray area. Trying to push him deeper into the gray area while also getting rid of some of the energy, it really wasn't a good move. Also, the rest of the film is rather boring a lot of the time, due to a lot of the comedy being trained from pirates, and because of that, it's not exactly an enjoyable film to watch through. The only redeeming quality is the villain. Captain Hook is more menacing than he is in the original, and he's a figure that you can relate to and like while still being the bad guy. Like I hinted to in the previous segment, this remake is not as bad as Peter Pan and Wendy. The actors are, for the most part, not bad in their roles. Even Ariel's actress, despite their race swapping being unnecessary, she does have a great singing voice, so the race swapping is forgivable. However, this film does suffer from being more boring than the original, especially with Chef Louis being cut from the film, and Ursula not having the same manic energy as her original counterpart, even if she is otherwise pretty faithful to the original character. And in some ways, she's even more evil than in the original. The main problems, though, include the fact that Ursula's scenes all take place in the dark, and because of that, it makes it difficult to see what's going on. Oh, and the real worst part is the bird. In the original, Scuttle was somewhat dumb, but he was also kinda likable. In the remake, while Scuttle does show up, Scuttle is a different character. Not only did they change the specific type of bird, but also gender swapping. And this bird is obnoxious, and they took all the entertaining aspects of Scuttle and threw them away. So this is a case of character flanderization on top of that. And there's also a very annoying song that she sings, which I'm not going to subject your ears to that. Oh, and the actress being overused by pretty much everyone doesn't help much either. Overall, do I hate this one? No, but I don't think it holds a candle to the original. Now, I would get to the final verdict right now, but there is one more film I wish to discuss. And this one is technically an exception to the rules I established before. And it's one that came out just last year. Mufasa, the Lion King. Now, when I saw the trailer to this film, I immediately thought that it was going to suck. And when the film came out, I still hold on to this opinion for the most part. Not only is this film pretty boring, but this film also retcons a lot from the original and even the remake. For starters, they changed it so that Scar was the rightful heir to the Pride Lands and Mufasa wasn't even related to Scar, yet Mufasa ended up becoming king anyway. For what reason? We'll get to that in a bit. But this change still throws the entire story and lore we were told in the original, and even hints of the story in the remake, into the trash can, just for the sake of a soulless live-action cash grab. Not to mention, the central villain of this film is really a bland and boring character, who only really serves as a way to give Scar a villain to face before becoming a villain. Oh, and speaking of Scar, it's time we talk about what happened to him. He gets the super annoying, and why does this trope even exist, the forced nuance treatment. This is where a villain is given nuanced traits that do not flow naturally with the character and are injected into the plot solely to make you feel bad for them. This has happened so many times, both in modern day and even in the past. Specifically sometime in the mid to late 90s as well as early 2000s. I really hate the forced nuance trope. Why do they keep doing this? All rambling aside, one more thing I need to say about this film is that someone even told me that this film was essentially Transformers 1 if what was shown in the marketing was the entire movie. If you don't understand what was going on, Transformers 1 essentially had a bad showing through the trailers due to the fact that it only showed the bad stuff. It didn't show any of the stuff that people actually wanted to see. And because of that, and combined with the association to Michael Bay, the film flopped at the box office. Mufasa ended up having a situation where it was kinda like Transformers 1, but unlike that, and the bad stuff was the entire film. Do you get it? Okay, good, let's move on. Alright, this part is probably what you came here for. The final verdict for each of these films. Now, 101 Dalmatians, Cinderella, Jungle Book of 2016, and I suppose Beauty and the Beast 2017 will be spared. These films are tolerable enough at worst and actually pretty good at best. As for the rest, we'll make this quick. So none of the individual characters will be destroyed in the punishment scene, just the movie so the punishment doesn't drag. With that said, release the dragons!
I am almost tempted to let you go, if only to let my enemies suffer. But I think not. I think a little game ends here. So tell me, Remakes, how do you choose to die?
Oh, shit. Alright, now that this is done, we are done covering the live action remakes. And unless Snow White 2025 end up being worse than everything else we've discussed, we are not going to talk about it. I really don't want to touch these movies unless it's a good one again. With that said, see y'all in the next video.